So I would like to welcome everyone to the Rita B. Leahy Career Series. I'm Susan Martin, the Program Director for PhD Career Development. The Rita B. Leahy Career Series brings together current doc students and postdocs and alumni so that you all can learn more about career options. We have 5 more of these planned beginning in January. And the goal is really to feature a broad career area and have alumni panelists who come from different disciplines. So today we are so privileged to have Crystal Upperman, Theresa Kim, and Aaron Manis with us. As you can see, they're all from different disciplines. And on the slide here, ironically, they're in the reverse order, but we're going to start with Aaron. I'm going to let each panelist introduce themselves briefly with their elevator pitch so you can see how they introduce themselves at networking. And then they're going to tell you a little bit about what they do, how they got there, and share some advice. Once all 3 panelists are finished sharing their stories, we will go ahead and open it up to Q&A. So let me stop sharing my screen, and we are going to start with Dr. Manis.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm Aaron Manis. I work with Culmen LLC, a small contracting firm, and my real job at Culmen LLC is to support the Data Analytics Technology Center and the Advanced Computing Branch at the Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology. We do big data analytics to support the Homeland Security enterprise. That includes everything from Arctic security to countering human trafficking to disaster response, a vast and interesting scope. That's the elevator pitch. Now, the reality is my primary career skill has been being lucky. So I'm not sure how much of my wisdom will be useful to you. So I will share some general thoughts, and then I'll offer some specific items that I think will be useful. I work at a big data center. I can't do any math. My PhD at the School of Public Policy was on the national security role of the vice president. The only numbers in my dissertation were at the bottom of the page. So how does something like this happen? I got into the government through something called the AAAS Fellowship. That's the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Write this down. If you're interested in working for the government, and this may be limiting for some of you, and are an American citizen, the AAAS Fellowship could be for you. It takes PhDs in the sciences. Sciences includes social science, includes public policy, includes communications, includes philosophy. What I would say is try it and see if your field counts under that rubric. Apply to this fellowship and feel free to be in touch with me. Let me say flat out, anyone is welcome to be in touch with me, and I'll share what I can. It puts you in the government for a year, almost always continued for a second year, and it often becomes a career track, but just as importantly, it creates a network. There's been about 200 AAAS fellows over the last, I think, 30, 40 years. So there's a couple thousand of us wandering around DC doing all sorts of things. So besides actually becoming a pathway in and of itself, it embeds you in this pretty extensive and pretty tight network. Let me tell you a little bit about why the AAAS Fellowship is important from the government side. The official reason is so that the US government can benefit from scientific and technical expertise. Well, that's true. There's another side to it. It is very, very hard for the US government to hire people. USAjobs.com is a national security threat. It is just such a nightmare to deal with. The regular federal hiring process is painful, but people within the government who want to get things done find workarounds, and the fellowship is one of them. This is a way to get someone capable, and believe me, if you have a PhD, you're capable. I know what the PhD does to you psychologically in the process, but trust me, step away from that. You're awesome. And it's a way for the government to get capable people in. They don't necessarily care exactly what you studied or what your credentials are. Now, here's where I'm going to get to the general advice. When you get a PhD, you're being trained in knowledge production, whatever the field is. The demand for knowledge production of the sort we do is limited. However, if you think about a complex system, there's that core bit, and then there's all the bits that support it. And when I say complex system, anything. How does our body turn food into energy? How does an idea go from being just an idea to becoming policy? All of these things, there's a vast chain of things that occur. So that, for example, my chunk of the US government does not, we support research. We don't have, well, we're not doing our own artificial intelligence research, at least not big picture. We're doing narrow implementation stuff. We're looking for grants. We're looking for companies. We're buying someone else's research. But being a smart consumer is its own skill. It's one thing to produce the knowledge, but making sure that your organization acquires the right knowledge, the information, the system that works for them is a complex skill in its own right. Similarly, is being a translator, so that I'm not doing deep social science research in my work at DHS, but I am taking social science research and turning it into something that DHS can use. So what I'm saying is, the PhD trains you, it's sort of this odd monastic thing. It trains you in certain ways to think and operate. And by the way, there are plenty of jobs within the government where you would do the kind of research you would do. And for some networking advice is find publications by government people, NIST, NIH, the whole alphabet soup of government agencies that do research. Find them. Talk to those people. Anybody who's written a paper is happy to talk to you about their paper. This is easy networking. Send them a note since we can't meet. Hey, I really like your paper on this, and so I'd love to chat with you about it. Then that's your entree to find out about that office. Find out if they're hiring, because the government does hire people who do the knowledge production. But the advice I'm giving is to think about what you're learning to do and then think about the things that are adjacent to it. How would those skills help you evaluate someone else's project? That's something not just the government, but corporate America, nonprofits, everybody needs. So the other thing I want to emphasize is soft skills and hard skills. As I said, I can't do any math. I'm there for my soft skills. I can take complex material and make it accessible to a broad range of groups. I can represent my office effectively, because we were supposed to talk about our day-to-day work. My day-to-day job is meetings. I go to meetings and I explain what my office does. I express what we're interested in so that businesses, other government agencies can figure out how to work with us. I go to meetings and explain what our my office serves as the advisor to the Homeland Security enterprise on big data and AI. So with my skill set, I can't come in and say, you want to buy this system or you want to do this kind of data structure. But I can come in and say, these are ways you should think about this problem set. These are ways you should approach this endeavor. These are questions you should be asking before you engage with a particular technology. That's my day-to-day life. Going to these meetings, waving the flag for my office, and trying to leave people with a good impression of it. And then also sharing concerns and raising issues for the Homeland Security enterprise and really for the US government. So with that, I'll wind up, but I think my LinkedIn page was shared. I'll talk to anyone, anytime about anything. Feel free to reach out.
Erin, thank you so much, because I think you have put research now in another perspective, which is exactly why you're on this panel. So we are going to move ahead now to Dr. Theresa Kim, and I will give you a little signal or send you a chat when your 10 minutes is wrapping up, and then Dr. Upperman, you'll bring us home, okay?
Thanks, Susan, for the introduction. Again, as Susan mentioned, my name is Theresa Kim, and I completed my PhD in health services at UMD back in 2017. And I was also a global health certificate recipient in 2016. Like my fellow Dr. Manis, I was also a AAAS fellow, or sorry, finalist. I declined the fellowship, and I chose my path into health services because my master's degree is in statistics, and I actually love numbers and I love using them. However, one of your jobs as a statistician, if you're doing your PhD, is to focus on a new method. I was interested more in the applications, and I chose my path in health services because I thought it was such a useful arena to apply those skills. With the passing of the Affordable Care Act, there was this opportunity to really take a look at these hard numbers of how many more people were getting insured under the ACA, how many more dollars people might save by finally getting access to insurance. My dissertation instead did focus a little bit on the domestic component of women finally able to access contraceptives, but also I took a look at the international face of it, where women might have access to reproductive health services under what's called the Sustainable Development Goals, where one of the goals, similar to the ACA, was to make sure that more women could have access to reproductive health services. After I finished my PhD, as I mentioned, I did pursue the fellowship under the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And I also did pursue academic positions too. However, I'm geographically constrained to the DC metropolitan area. My husband is at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory. We weren't just willing to get up and move again since his job was well established. So I looked into organizations that would hire me for my research skills as well. I actually really enjoy the scientific points of view. However, I haven't become a technical officer or a technical scientist, and instead I'm now a scientific program officer at Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. One of the fun things I get to do in my day-to-day job is actually manage other people's research and how numbers really enhance their research. The big data are probably focusing on electronic health records, because one of the mandates under the ACA is that more medical practices need to switch to these type of data and records keeping. And one of the skills I can transfer to this job is actually evaluate how strong a scientific proposal might be in order to get funding from our organization. I think I have enough of a statistics background still. Oh, I have only a master's degree, but the point is that I kept using those skills throughout my PhD. I have enough of these skills that during my meetings with principal investigators, I can ask questions that are pertinent as to how effective their means are for gathering extracted text from health records, particularly things that are not just numbers like what a patient's blood pressure is, or what a patient's cell count might be, but also any types of texts that doctors have put in that are free text. Like if you've ever done therapy, there might be free text notes about what doctors have gathered when they've been counseling patients. So even though I don't necessarily do that personally, I have to have enough of those skills to understand that what investigators are proposing and what they're doing is still strong enough. And if the science doesn't pass muster, it's then really an indication we shouldn't be funding this research in the first place, and we don't want it to ever seem like we're wasting people's tax money in doing so. I agree with Erin as well that you can't just be an effective scientific thinker when being a good scientist. There's a lot of distrust in this country, or actually in the world, about science right now, which is very unfortunate. We have to be strong communicators and proponents as well as to why it's important that we maintain not just the scientific rigor, but also the words that doctors or public health experts or climate scientists or engineers, why it's important that we listen to this research and how it could potentially influence policy, but ultimately how it can also improve people's health over time. If anyone wishes to reach out to me about these types of jobs and such outside of academia, by all means, please get in touch with me. You can send me a message on LinkedIn, and I'd love to talk with you more.
Teresa, do you have some advice? Because you have a few more moments. You have about 3 or 4 more minutes if you want to share any advice, things you wish you had known.
So actually, more of the advice I've been giving has been to undergraduates. I think by the time a student has gotten to the point where they're completing a dissertation, they've gained some experience of like what makes it really effective to do a proper literature search, or what makes it really good way to actually clearly write your statements. One of the things we learn as PhD students is how to do academic papers and manuscripts. And though it's really important to clearly dictate why your research is important, it's also effective to be able to communicate with someone quickly. Like if you happen to ever run into someone like Bill Gates or President-elect Joe Biden, say like, I've got this idea, but I also want you to know why this is really important. To actually be able to write down something in a quick, crisp paragraph or to your 60-second pitch is a great skill to have. And I'm still learning that myself.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, Dr. Upperman.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Martin, and thank you to the graduate school for inviting me to, be a part of this panel today. The words that Erin and Teresa shared are definitely sentiments that I share. Hello, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Crystal Efferman. I currently work at a startup tech company that does hyperlocal air quality monitoring. I serve as a senior scientist. However, my existence has always been as a polymorph in essence. There isn't a subject matter under the topic of environmental science that I don't know about. And that's because of my lived experience and career trajectory. How did I end up here? Well, I'm one of those fortunate people who discovered that I knew what I loved early on in my life. I was introduced to environmental science in high school, and it became my obsession and my passion. And it's been my guiding light for my entire career. I got an undergraduate degree in environmental science and did a series of internships every year. And then my first job out of undergrad was working for BASF in an R&D facility in New Jersey, doing wet chemistry for monoliths that go into catalytic converters for cars. So when cars have to abate to EPA regulations for emissions, I worked on that. That was my first job out of undergrad. And I left that job because they were paying me too much, because I knew I wanted to do more. And if I'd stayed there, I would have never left at all because they were paying a lot. And after that, I ended up working for the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection in what's kitschy now is dirty dirt. I was doing site remediation work. And did that for a period of time and decided to make sort of like a life decision more so on the personal side, because at that point in time, I had met a young man in undergrad and we decided we're going to move in together, and he was still in Georgia. So I pursued jobs in Georgia and started working for the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. doing ambient air quality monitoring. So I did that for 3 years, monitoring all the sites and analyzing all the data for the state of Georgia and contributing to the annual report that we had to write every year about the state of air quality in Georgia. And while I was doing that, I started matriculating at a university, Kennesaw State University, because I thought I was going to be a public administrator. So I started learning more about governance, the government, and how the government works. And when I finished that master's in public administration, it came to me like, well, I really had this passion for environmental science and really enjoyed the research experience I had at BASF in a wet lab, and thought, how about trying to maybe get a PhD in environmental science, because it's my passion once again. And I'd applied to a couple programs, but again, at that point in time, and this will sound like I'm chasing some guy, but it all comes full circle. But at the point in time, my then boyfriend decided to do the White House internship, and we kind of figured out we would probably land here in DC. So I was looking at programs here. I applied to the MEES program, didn't talk to any advisors or anything like that before, but submitted an application. I remember the director at the point in time, who was Dr. Painter, contacted me, and he was like, yeah, we have your application. It's a solid application. We sent it around, but none of the faculty members picked it up because they just didn't know who you were. And he was like, if you can get someone to say they'll be your advisor, we'll admit you into the program. So fine, I came up that summer, and there's one woman that I thought I wanted to do entomology because I was really interested in sort of pesticides and reducing pesticide overuse and focusing on like the Eastern Shore, the agricultural area, doing those types of engagement with communities. And I met with her, and she was like, well, I'm not really needing any graduate. I'm not looking for like a PhD student. I'm looking for more so master's student. She was like, well, there are 2 faculty members that I know in the School of Public Health that she knows they're new faculty. They would be interested in a PhD student. So I reached out to both of them. And the first person that responded back to me was the person I met with, who was Amir Sapkota. And I remember the day that I met with him, it was in the summer, so it was really hot. Campus was still closed because it was open because of summer school, but mostly closed. It was so hot, and I put on like the best suit that I had, and I came up and I met him in person, and we had just a full-on conversation about what my interests and passions were. And after that conversation, he agreed to be my advisor. So that's how I ended up in, matriculating for a PhD, and was fortunate to have had access to resources, the McNair program, the Bridge to the Doctorate program funded the first 2 years of my PhD. And then after that, I applied for the EPA STAR, which I was awarded, and that carried me through the remainder of my matriculation. And actually, while I was matriculating, I had the fortunate opportunity to serve as a program manager for the Maryland Department of Health's Climate and Health Program, which was funded by CDC. So come to the end of the point in which you're ready to graduate and you're like, what are you going to do? Well, the thing that I did was I did what you're doing right now. I talked to as many friends that I had made, as many people that I had come across who had PhDs. And I asked them, what do you do? How did you get there? Was this like what you landed on? And more I spoke to people, the more I engaged, even with like early, more recent individuals who had finished their PhD. A lot of them were stuck in the cycle of postdocs. It was that point in time where access to funding for new labs to be established was essentially constricting. And it was very hard for individuals to find sort of like, assistant professorships without having, money behind them. And that piqued something in me. I was like, well, if there are individuals out there who have like, these well-branded PhD degrees, and they're not getting access at all to any, like, as far as the next step, then I have to sort of make do and figure out what would be next for me. So in talking to a bunch of people, it became very illuminated to me that the possibility of consulting, because DC is known for access to myriad of consulting firms. So I then ended up landing a job with a company called AECOM in their environmental business line, doing environmental consulting. And just how random this is. I was doing environmental consulting for Department of Defense, the Marine Corps, and helping them evaluate the migration of munitions from operational ranges. So this is where military personnel train and where they fire live ammunition, assessing whether or not that ammunition is moving off the military site onto public land. So that's what I started off doing. That was like the first thing I did after graduating. And I did that for, that project I was involved in for like 6 months. But what became illuminated to me was the fact that in the consulting world, there you have the big fish and you have the little fish. And by the big fish, I mean, there's always the man, I'm just going to be clear with you, the man with the nice suit who calls all the shots, he holds all the gold, and he makes all the rules. And I was like, how do these people get to where they're at? And how is it that they're calling all the shots? So I talked to my boss and I was like, well, it seems to me like the people who are doing this thing called business development are the ones who are essentially like, they're the ones calling the shots. And I was like, I want to call the shots. So how do I get to the point of, in essence, how do I get into business development? And that was a mistake that my boss made. He made the mistake of giving me the shot to write a proposal. And I wrote a proposal so much that it afforded me the opportunity to be poached by one of his team members. And I was poached and given carte blanche to develop a unique pipeline of business for AECOM doing climate adaptation and resiliency for the Southeast US, Latin America, and Caribbean. And Latin America and the Caribbean was an arena that they hadn't at all put a lot of vested interest into. Now, how does someone with a strong science background end up doing business development is probably what you're wondering, like, what in the world are you doing? So I did that for 3 years. And then after doing that, while I was there, I was like enjoying myself, required a lot of external engagement. I'm talking about I had to develop relationships with ambassadors here in DC, ambassadors for majority of the countries in the Caribbean and in Latin America, had to engage with people on the Hill, also engage with people in various county and state offices. So it required a lot of public engagement in that regard to develop relationships, to showcase that, that one, as a spokesperson for the company and the team, that we have skill sets that can, enhance any type of project that they're trying to execute, and also expressing interest in whatever, initiatives they had coming down the pipeline. But after that, the Global Commission on Adaptation had launched. And I remember watching the launch on my phone. And I was like, this is so interesting. It was around climate adaptation and resiliency. And because it was on climate adaptation and resiliency, and Bill Gates, Ban Ki-moon, and Kristalina Georgieva had all come together as they were spearheading this commission. They had gotten 20 million euros invested in it. And I just randomly put in an application. So the thing about it is I put in an application and just let it sit, and I got a call for an interview. Well, unbeknownst to me, the person who was in charge of hiring the researcher for this project knew my advisor, Amir Sapkota, and had given him a call and just had a random conversation about this young woman, Crystal, sent an application, who is she? And went into the interview not knowing any of that information. Of course, had a solid interview and ended up getting the opportunity to serve on the Global Commission on Adaptation. And that was a very fulfilling project. But what I'm going to share with you next, how I ended up where I'm at right now, is just a series, as Erin said. Luck is important, it really is. But taking initiative and being well prepared for that luck is something that you have to get comfortable with. While I was doing the Global Commission on Adaptation, there was a summer, my husband ended up in Martha's Vineyard, and I wasn't supposed to be in Martha's Vineyard. I figured, hey, you're in Martha's Vineyard, so I'm going to fly up and come. And I was going to work remotely. And he ended up being there for work purposes and, had to put on this initiative and this event. And because of the initiative and event, there was a small lunch that had to happen. And I wasn't going to lunch because at that point in time, I was doing work. I got a random call and he was like, hey, you should probably come to this lunch. And I'm like, well, I'm not even dressed. I'm not ready. And I can tell you, it took me 20 minutes. It was the fastest get ready, get dressed I've ever done. And I took an Uber over to the location. I get there and it's a small intimate gathering. And it's at that gathering where I met the person who actually was an investor in the company that I work for right now. And I wasn't looking for a job at that point in time, but the conversation that I had with that investor led her to realize, like, you have similar characteristics. You also have the expertise. You speak about this like it's your passion. And she was like, you should just have a conversation with this woman who I know who runs this company. And from that conversation is how I ended up essentially at Aclima. So I say all of that to say is that your matriculation right now is a series of choices and decisions. And we're all intelligent, we're all smart, we're all gonna know the numbers. You're gonna know 1 + 1 = 2, or if you're a mathematician, you're gonna know that that proof doesn't essentially equate. But what I will say is that we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable to be successful. And the more that you put yourself in uncomfortable positions, the higher your chances will be. It's not a matter of like, you know, X plus Y is going to give you Z. It's a matter of whether or not you are going to take the step to get X or not. And oftentimes we don't take the next step. So my best advice is get comfortable with being uncomfortable and show up. And I say show up because right now I'm looking at a screen and I see only names, not to chastise anyone. I don't see really faces. I see some people who have pictures. And it's all a matter of how you show up and whether you choose to show up. Right now, Teresa and Aaron and myself, we don't know who you are, and we can't put a face to your name at all. We see your names, but we can't put a face to it. So I say, you know, get comfortable with being uncomfortable and show up for yourself, because it matters if you are passionate about what you want to engage and who you want to engage with. So I'll stop there, Susan, and open to
perfect place. That is the perfect place to jump off. And I'm sorry I interrupted you. Let you finish your sentence.
No, I was finished.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's sometimes a little time delay here. I apologize for that. So our students and postdocs who are here came here to learn about research careers outside of academia. And as you can see, we have 3 PhDs who learned how to do research in different disciplines, and their careers have taken different paths. So this is a great time for you to get uncomfortable, as Dr. Upperman said, and please turn your cameras on so that they can see your faces. I'm going to go to the gallery view now so I can see all of you. And if you would like to ask a question, please unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and you can direct the question to one or more of the panelists. So I'll give you all a moment to get settled. Okay.
Yeah, I would like to ask a question. My name's Miranda. I'm in the Behavior Ecology, Evolution, and Systematics program in the biology department. I just wondered, for those of us, like, I've always been a wet bench scientist, but what's the transition like to something that's more of a policy position? Like, you know, I don't currently know anything about policy. It's something that I might consider. I mean, I love science. I like science communication. Maybe that's a career a career that I could see myself doing. What is that transition like, and what's the learning curve, I guess? So anybody, I guess, who wants to answer, but.
Crystal, why don't you start it off, and then Teresa and Aaron, because I think this is I'm so glad you asked that question, Miranda. This is one of the biggest questions I get asked all the time, is how do I go from researcher with this very narrow dissertation topic to the world of policy?
Yeah.
That's a very, very good question, Miranda, and thank you for asking it. It gets into the whole notion of what Aaron mentioned earlier, is that you're doing something that's very specific, yes, but at the end of the day, how you choose to communicate that and how it applies to the broader environment in which your topic exists is what matters. So you're doing this wet bench analysis for what reason? I'm sure it's tied to some particular either disease or topic. And you can speak to that entire topic better than anyone else, very likely, because you're honing in on a very nuanced aspect of it. That's important because that's context that other people do not have. if you're thinking of like the day-to-day, like the fact that you're going into a lab and you're essentially, you're working in a laboratory versus having to work in an office with individuals or learning to communicate in a different form or fashion. It's not a hard thing. It's not a hard crossover. It's essentially just engaging a different aspect of your interests. You say that you have an interest in science communication, and all of that is something that you can tap into to make that transition successful. I say oftentimes, I think what you're asking about is the unknown. And the unknown is that you haven't experienced it before. And because you haven't experienced before, you're a little bit apprehensive. So it's incumbent upon at this point, what can you do to gain more information about it? Do you seek out an internship to just like, figure out what that transition could be like? Do you seek out maybe an opportunity to just do that work and just take that jump? Do you seek out a fellowship, whether that's AAAS or some other fellowship to start engaging and getting your repertoire? Or do you volunteer with a professional society to do that? I mean, a lot of the skill sets that I developed was because I volunteered with professional societies also. And that required you to get on meetings, to be on meetings, to try and write policy that was for the organization. So try to find ways that are meaningful, that are tied to your profession, to help you hone and develop that skill, but also be inquisitive and try to get an experience of what that would be like, even if it's shadowing someone in the meantime, so that you can be more informed, because the apprehension just stems from, just the lack of having had that experience in the past. And I'll pass it off to Teresa or Aaron if they want to add more to that, for sure.
Yeah, thank you, Crystal.
So, as a policy person who's never done anything even close to bench science, much of what we do is not rocket science. It is not bench science. Policy is in many cases the operating code of government, right? It's the frameworks that enable people. It's funny, I'm working on a policy document right now, so forefront in my head. So your specific research may or may not ever be relevant, but to facilitate research, I actually had a chat with somebody about this a couple of years ago on the microbiome. We need international understandings. No, we don't need to, the policymakers don't need all the details about the microbiome. You need to know enough, which you almost certainly do, or be able to quickly synthesize that knowledge.
Yeah.
That you can then give them what they need to operate. So again, you'll have to synthesize the thing you already know, the biology, and then you'll have to synthesize the stuff you don't quite know, but it's learnable, which is the policy, and then you have to make it short. In about half an hour, I teach a class at Maryland on foreign policy process, and I'm really beating up on my students to send me 3-page memos that tell a very busy person everything they need to know to make a decision, right? So synthesize and brevity. And it's not nearly as grubby as bench science. We don't need to wash your hands all the time. You'll read a bunch of stuff and push it together in a way that is accessible. So it's really that simple. And there are jobs all over the government. I'll offer one framework, since this is very scientific. And I wrote a note in the thing, non-science PhDs, you're needed too. And I'm happy to talk about that, but you can think about science for policy and then science policy. So are you trying to inform how we do our scientific enterprise? That's the NSF, versus I'm more in the science for policy business. What kind of science can enable my department to undertake its mission?
Cool, thank you.
So I see that someone put in a comment about the 3-minute thesis, and actually my advice was to go to that, because oftentimes when you're performing your wet lab or any long-winded dissertation, someone's going to ask you, so what? And it's not as a means to be rude, but it's a means to say, that's really important. Why should anybody care about this? And the crux of it is you need to give your definitive answer of why your research, how you've become an expert in this field, what are the implications of it? Because the next thing that comes after so what or why should I care is what next? I have this problem. I have found a means, or I've found a solution that we can somehow mitigate this problem, or I found a way that we've been able to analyze this problem in the first place. And then you now have a way to advise someone what you should do next to solve this problem, or what you can do next to actually find, like, why we need to solve this problem, because further problems can develop from it. And then the last thing, somehow you can answer, if you can, and this is maybe something you can do with 3-minute thesis, or if you do choose to go into academia, to follow the money. And that is, where can I go to get someone to give me money to continue doing this? Or is this problem pithy enough, or is it ongoing? And did someone give a specific way to solve the problem that you think there's a foreseeable reason that we should give this person money? And if you're able to answer these questions, it sounds like you're on the right track to getting something more concrete and crisp.
Thank you. So it sounds like it's about taking small action steps and getting out of your comfort zone. Thank you, Aditi, for putting in the information about the student organization, the graduate student organization doing science policy. Okay.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, let's take a couple more questions.
I have a question. Hi, everyone. I'm Megan. So this is directed at Dr. Manis. So you were talking about the AAAS fellowship, and then there was some talk in the chat about how that's something that's not available to apply to until you've finished your PhD, but that there's this program called the PMF program that is accessible to people who are currently not done with their PhD yet. I was wondering if you maybe could speak to that a little bit and what that program is about.
So I didn't do the PMF program. In fact, I applied a couple of times and never quite got it. But
I was going to say I was the one who put in the link to PMF.
Okay.
And I can speak a little bit of it, but similar to AAAS, it does come in through USA Jobs, and it is put in during the autumn. And it's possible, I can't remember if the deadline has passed. It's possible you may still be able to access this through USA Jobs. You'll just have to look closely for the Presidential Management Fellows Program. Depending on your area of expertise, there are other fellowships you can consider through that go to different branches of government. Depending on if you're doing health, there are some that are put in through USAID. That's called the STAR Fellowship. And then there's also fellowships that go through US military health systems that are through HJF. Now, what I do want to mention about the Presidential Management Fellows is that some of the branches of government have ceased operating with the fellowship program. And I don't know if any of this is going to change under the new administration. So it's just something you need to research before you apply. Like if you're very insistent, I want to be with this branch, you want to confirm that that's still a possibility for your PMF application.
So as you're hearing, there are many opportunities for students and new graduates to enter into some of these fellowship programs. And I'd just like to throw out there that as you're doing informational conversations and talking to people about the work that they do, and these panelists have agreed, and I'm sure they have colleagues that they would connect you with, that's a great question to ask. Do you know about any fellowship or internship or other types of opportunities for new grads? Because while there are these federal government level ones, there are, as Dr. Kim has just said, there are some that are embedded in different agencies or branches as well. And it can feel a bit overwhelming and like alphabet soup. But when you start talking to alumni, they'll tell you about these things. Aaron or Crystal, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, the PMF is a well-known, it's another critical pathway into the government, the US government. Even though some agencies have stopped doing it, they like it. It's a way to get talented, capable people in. I was just going to mention quickly, Teresa, you mentioned APL. There are a lot of large organizations in the greater DC area that are very interested in your skills. APL is one, RAND, but bigger than RAND in the FFRDC world is MITRE, MITRE. They hire a vast range of experts. A friend of mine who's an anthropologist is there. Of course, every flavor of science and technology. There's we've touched on it a little bit, but there are a gazillion consulting firms, a lot of them doing very cool, interesting work. RTI, we could just name them all afternoon.
Right.
Mathematica.
Yep. What did we all do before Dr. Google? So any of you can type in educational consulting firms. You can, once you start unraveling this, you'll be shocked. We're in a great area.
That being said, I never apply to jobs because I just assume, you looked at LinkedIn, you'd be in the top 5% of the 1,000 applicants. Okay, that makes me in the top 50. If I'm 1 out of 50, what are my odds really? On the other hand, if you're applying to a MITRE or an APL or any of them, find people, and again, 6 degrees of separation. You're probably only 2 degrees separated from somebody at one of these organizations. You can gather, and they're large organizations, but you can gather intelligence about them. This is a mission. It's not. You can learn, how do they work? Who does what there? What are their, what do they look for? How do they structure things so you can pitch yourself at the appropriate level? That's a big one when you're talking about a large organization. All of this is very doable. Google makes it so easy, to be honest. We've left you all shell-shocked.
What other questions? This is a great opportunity to ask anything. Crystal, Teresa, and Aaron have a wealth of knowledge and expertise and experience.
Hi, my name is Xiaoli. I'm a doctoral student in applied linguistics and language education. I wonder if any of you can talk about, the balance between following passion and also being uncomfortable learning some new skills. For example, I'm learning statistics now. Although my undergrad was economics, I never thought I would be picking up statistics again, but now I'm learning more advanced stats class, and I definitely I don't feel very, comfortable. So how do you balance that?
You learn things because you're picking up a mental tool to solve a problem, right? Will statistics help you solve problems in your field? Presumably.
Yeah.
So the statistics is, by the way, I can't do any statistics myself, but my wife is a statistician. So I've learned it by osmosis. But that being said, if it's going to enable you to do the things you really want to do, then it's worth it to be uncomfortable. Does that help?
It does. It's just sometimes I feel, I'm spending so much time on stats and I don't know if this is, I know it will be helpful. It's just sometimes I don't see, I don't see my future with stats yet.
If I can add some context to that, just like to illuminate for you. Majority of the times when you are in a situation like this, where you're learning something like, oh, I don't think I'm going to use this or need this, it always comes back full circle, to be honest with you. So it may not appear to be like you're comfortable with it right now, but lo and behold, it may end up being essential to something that you have to do later on in the future. And you'll reflect on this and you'll be like, I'm actually glad that I did engage in that exercise of pushing myself beyond my comfort level, because then you have a resource to tap into. Now you're likely proficient, or you're even able to understand if someone is giving a statistical talk, and you're able to sort of ask questions that can put you in a position of, even though you may not think that you are advanced in it, it may showcase you to be somewhat proficient in it and have somewhat level of advanced understanding. Who knows, you may be doing an interview and they're like, oh, your job has nothing to do with statistics, but you may have to engage with the data science team, and you have to have a conversation with the data scientist in that regard. And you can just say, oh yeah, you know, I understand logistic regression, or you can say, oh, I know what, like, you know, what beta is in the equation or something like that. Majority of the times those things come full circle. And if I can just tell you, that's what I've learned from just like the experiences that I've had. Even if there was a job that I was doing where I did not enjoy it at all. I mean, I didn't really like when I worked at Georgia Department of Natural Resources. Sometimes when the team who was responsible for changing the filters for the stationary monitors all across Georgia, sometimes if someone was sick or something, I would have to fill in because I was like available. I didn't like that I would have to drive out to go and do that. No, but now I'm at a tech company that is essentially doing air quality monitoring. And I can tell and speak to what a air monitor, a federal reference grade, a piece of equipment for collecting air quality information looks like, how it operates, how it's processed, how they, you know, can take canisters, the canisters go off to the lab, like just how all of that is done. But did I enjoy doing it at that point in time? No, because I was like, I don't want to do field work. But in essence, it comes back full circle. And that's like 10 years later now that I'm accessing information that I learned a decade ago. So you just never know.
Hi, Shelly. I think that's a great question. I had this perception that when I got my job, I wondered, am I going to miss doing my own research? Because I had this passion that I wanted to focus on reproductive health. I don't do that anymore. And it's not because I care less about it. It's because one of your jobs while you're managing your portfolio for your employer is to become a generalist. That's not to say that this is how every job is going to be, but a lot of jobs outside of academia want to make sure that you have to be held responsible to be able to do other things other than what your PhD is in. From my own experience, I haven't gone back to what I did specifically for my dissertation. And as Crystal says, it's more like I'm going back to things I was doing 10 or 15 years ago, along with things that I even did at my first job, which was to make sure that all the projects are maintaining their deadlines, and that they're not going over budget, something as such. But I do think it's always useful to have a wide variety of skills, not just your computational or your analytical skills, but the ability to effectively communicate both written and orally. It's always great to have passion. And if you see yourself maybe wanting to start your own business on what you did your dissertation on, that's wonderful. But a lot of jobs, you're always going to, in the end, be meeting the demands of somebody else. And even if you do start your own business, it could be meeting the demands of a client. So just to keep in mind and have an open mind that even if you're not doing exactly what you had planned for, it's okay to delineate and then realize in the end, sometimes your journey is a bit more circuitous than from what you had originally anticipated. And that's okay too.
Dr. Kim, that is a perfect note for us to end on. So you've heard from our panelists today that you have marketable skills. It's about how you think, how you solve complex problems, how what you learn now might be applicable 5 years from now. And I so appreciated the advice about getting out of comfort zones and leveraging networks. And luck plays a part of it.